And he was the one who succeeded in doing this. Yeah. So he goes into the Tur Abdin and beyond into the Tigris area in the year 882. And there is this passage, which in isolation, again, sounds really nice. You know, what a pleasant person, what a savior, the savior of the people of Assyria. Because he says, I brought back the tired people of Assyria, who in the face of famine and hunger had gone up to other lands, to the land of Shubria. And I settled them in the city of Tushran. That sounds wonderful. And if I were a tired Assyrian, I would be super grateful. Okay, so this very same phrase, albeit with slightly different places, is already used in the inscriptions of his great-grandfather, Ashur-dan, the one with the short name, hence the early one. He uses this not within a campaign report, but at the end of an inscription that details all his conquests in the north and in the east. And then also says, I brought back the tired people of Assyria who in the face of famine and hunger and need had abandoned their cities and houses and had gone up to other lands. I settled them in suitable cities and houses, and they dwelt in peace. Yeah. So there's a dialogue between these two inscriptions. The words are identical, and that's why we can reconstruct the very damaged Ashur-dan inscription. What's important is that Ashur-dan then continues with a very general remarks about the way he has reorganized the country by saying, I constructed palaces in the districts of my land. I hitched up plows in the districts of my land and piled up more grain than ever before. I hitched up numerous teams of horses for the forces or the armies of Assyria. So districts is basically the word that we often translate as provinces, using a Latin term. So he constructs centers for these provinces. These are always called palaces because they are at the heart of these centers is the house of the king. Even if the king is only there occasionally, it's still a palace. Yeah, and these then serve as storage facilities for the thing that underpins the Assyrian economy, and that's grain. Yeah, because this is really a farmer's world. Yeah, it's all about agriculture. Okay, and so these centers serve as grain storage facilities. And then he turns to the other very, very important thing, and that is increasing the Assyrian army. So I hitched up numerous teams of horses for the forces of Assyria. That refers to the drastic increase of the Assyrian standing forces that happened during that time, from the 10th to the 9th century. Yeah. So, but Ashur-dan sort of doesn't link this up with specifics. And that's why instead of focusing on this earlier attestation, we're going to focus on the much lengthier report for the year 882 to observe what happens in detail when you want to achieve this. Because all of this sounds like, yeah, what's not to like? It's all in, this is also disorganized. Comes the king of Assyria, rescues all the poor people. They all get settled. There's a palace is being built. It's great, right? Then a lot of grain gets stored. My God, that's the best way to counter famine and hunger. We agree to that for sure. And yeah, sure, you need to also secure this. So yeah, let's have a big army. It all sounds really good, right? Again, a lesson from a Pathfinder empire. If you ever conquer a country, take care of provisioning and take care of security. Good idea, for sure. But how does this happen in detail? And for that, we will turn to Ashurnasirpal. And we can really contextualize this sequence. And then we come very quickly to our topic of mass violence, and especially discourse of mass violence in the service of empire building. And as I said, I normally like to keep it abstract, yeah, to the extent that I've been accused of sort of basically distorting the fact that ancient Assyria is a brutal, horrible state. Well, obviously it is, because every empire is. Yeah, whether you make people addicted to sugar, or whether you force them to work in the fields for you, it doesn't really. It's nuances. Yeah, but of course Assyria is a terrible state. I mean, that goes without saying. Yeah. But normally I like to keep it abstract, but now we have to really sort of break it down to what's going on. And what is very important to me is that this is what Ashurnasirpal wanted to be known about, his methods. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily tell us what was happening. It tells us what the king of Assyria wants people to think has happened. Yeah. And that's a very, very important distinction. Now, I do not doubt that this actually happened. Yeah. But I just want you to understand how important it is that horrible, horrible atrocities happen, and one wishes people to know about this. This is very relevant now, because most of us have grown up in a time where horrible atrocities were hidden. Yeah. But we have moved, unfortunately, into a time where this is no longer so. Yeah. And I remind you of videos that have been circulated by members of ISIS and Hamas, to name but two agents, also Russia, of course, and others, where these atrocities are being used to make a point. Yeah. Where the violence is made part of yet more violence. Yeah. And that to us is a very alien construct, but I just want to emphasize that there are people that do this now, and it does work. Yeah. And so what I want to say is, this is what the Assyrians wanted to be known about this. Yeah. Whether the reality was worse or was better, we cannot know. It was for sure bad. Yeah. The point is, they wanted people to be afraid. They wanted people to think about this, and they wanted to create a climate of this could happen to me. This could happen to my son, to my daughter, to my wife, to my father, to me. Okay, that's the important thing here. Okay, so and this is very specific for the 9th century. Believe me that there are inscriptions of other Assyrian kings that do not do this. Yeah. But Ashurnasirpal chooses to really bring the violence to the center. And I did tell you, he could have written these nice utopian inscriptions where it's all about, we move to Kalchu, and this is the start of a new age, and it's gonna be great. Yeah. And the past doesn't matter. No, it's all about the past matters, and let me tell you why. Okay. So, fine. So we're still in the nice parts, by the way. Yeah, and we're going to go through those very, very quickly. So he comes from the south east, from the Tigris. He enters the Tur Abdin and crosses into this mountain range, and there is killing and fighting. Eventually, he comes out on the other end and reaches the river Tigris. On the river Tigris, there is the ancient city of Tushhan. Yeah, and in Tushhan, he says, I reorganized the city Tushhan. I cleared away its old wall, delineated its area, and reached its foundation pit. I built and completed it from its foundation to its crenellations. I decorated it splendidly. I found it there in a palace for the abode of my royal majesty. I made doors and installed them in its gates. I built and completed that palace from its foundations to its crenellations. Let's go to the next slide. Because the city of Tushhan has been very, very well explored by an international team headed by Tim Matney, and one of the excavators is among us, Michael Wolf, who has indeed excavated part of the palace. No? Part of 8 palace. What have you been doing in all this? It's very, so in your step trench, you didn't have anything of the, yeah, but you've been in Tushhan. Hmm? Dirk did, okay. Dirk Wicke, who is one of the editors of this book, he excavated the palace of Tushhan. What Michael Wolf did No one knows. But in any case, I want to point you to this very, very good book, which also won prizes for making archaeology accessible to the wider world, on the many, many years of excavating Ziyaret-Tepe. That is the modern name of Tushhan. Yeah. And okay, so it's not our topic, how beautiful Tushhan turned out to be. Yeah. What is important is that Tushhan was, and that's also discussed, of course, in this book, that Tushhan was part of the Middle Assyrian state. So in my previous map of the 13th century, Tushhan was part of that. And it was at Tushhan, but especially at the very small site of Girijano, opposite of Ziyaret-Tepe, where Middle Assyrian tablets from the reign of Tiglath-Pileser I were found by a team headed by Andreas Schachner and Michael Rofen. I were involved in working with these tablets. So this is not just fiction when he says that he comes to Tushhan, he makes Tushhan beautiful, and he returns to a place where Assyrians had lived before. Yeah. So this is fact. Yeah. He's not making this up. He is returning to previously controlled regions of the Assyrian state. Next step is, I made an image of myself of white limestone and wrote thereon praise of the extraordinary power and heroic deeds that I had been accomplishing in the Nairi lands, that's wider Anatolia, if you will. I erected it in the city of Tushhan. I wrote out my commemorative inscription and deposited it in its wall. And while this isn't that specific Assyrian stele, it was found very nearby, some 30 kilometers up the Tigris. This is the Kurch monolith of Ashurnasirpal, which is currently in the British Museum. And that's the kind of object that the king refers to. A stele with a rounded top that shows the king in prayer, and that is covered with a cuneiform inscription that pretty much corresponds to what the text we are reading right now together. Yeah. Okay. And that's his commemorative inscription. And then comes the sequence that we focused on. I brought back the tired Assyrians who in the face of famine and hunger had gone up to other lands, to the land of Shubria. That's where they'd gone up. He brings them down and he settles them now in the city of Tushhan. And as I said, what's not to like about that? Clearly Tushhan is a swell place. Michael spent many, many summers there for no good reason, quite clearly. So it's lovely. Okay. So he then continues and said, I took over the city for myself and stored therein barley and straw from the land nearby. That's pretty much like Ashurdan continued as well, that this city doesn't just serve as a city, but that it serves as a grain and straw reserve. So the city is being established as a provincial center, and that's indeed also clear from many other sources. Now, I want to very, very briefly make sure that you understand that what he says here about Assyrians having been here in that region before and having sort of gone up into the mountains, that's something that we know from this chronicle text, which we started for the reign of Tiglath-Pileser I in the 11th century. And that's also attested in private legal documents from that time that were found at this place Girijano that I already mentioned. So again, my beautiful formatting has been destroyed, but whereas at the time when we published this, we thought we were in the reign of Ashur-bel-Kala. This is really just a side note. We now know that this is Tiglath-Pileser I. Yeah, and in this text, which is a loan agreement, one clause says, if the debtor does not come to the harvest and does not take up the sickle for the creditor, if he flees to the mountains or somewhere else. Yeah, so at that time, it is a reality that people make this choice to leave the fields and go into the mountains, yeah, and basically leave behind this lifestyle as a farmer, yeah. Okay, so this is actually happening, and so this is not just Ashurnasirpal fantasizing. Yeah, this is actually happening. So it's not that he isn't right when he says there are the weak people or the weakened people of Assyria that need to be saved from famine and hunger. From a viewpoint of the Assyrian crown, this is an accurate description of what has been going on. People that would enjoy a wonderful lifestyle as a farmer if only they stayed in the fields and if only they did agricultural work, instead have gone up into the mountains where they lead a pastoralist lifestyle. Yeah, that sounds attractive if you are a pastoralist, but if you are an agriculturalist, then that's the worst thing you can possibly do. Yeah. So I grew up in Tennengau region of Salzburg in Austria, where we happily are able to combine both. But in Mesopotamia, this is seen as a totally binary divided thing. You're either a farmer or you have animals. You don't do both, yeah, because the animals in question would be sheep. Yeah, you'd be roaming around with your sheep flocks. Okay, so from his point of view, what he does by re-establishing the city and by re-establishing the population in that city, he's restoring the balance. And that's what the Assyrian king always does. He restores the balance, yeah? And he turns people that are meant to be farmers, from his viewpoint, back into farmers, yeah? And if we stop here, we could be happy. And we can imagine that all of this was just like a conversation. And it's like, so you've been shepherding for generations. Do you like it? Oh, it's a hard life, isn't it? How about I support your transition to being a farmer? I'll really support you. I'll build your house. I'll give you seed, Want to do that? Yeah, great. Let's shake on it. That's it. That could be the conquest of the Syrian Empire. But unfortunately, Ashurnasirpal goes on because he wants us to know what happens if people do not agree immediately to being reclaimed as Assyrians, okay? And he could have chosen not to tell us, but he wanted us to know. When I say us, I mean a general audience. I mean especially his contemporaries. And that's why it's important to me that you realize that these stele that he set up in all these places have exactly that text on them, yeah? They say this, yeah? If you care, if you say, oh, but what's this? That's new. What happened? Oh, the Assyrians set it up last year. What does it say? Well, let me tell you. So, okay. So what happens? Okay. Once he's established Tushkhan, re-established it as an Assyrian city, settled it with Assyrians, and made it a provincial center, the rest of the inhabitants of the land Nirbu, that's the one he crossed when he came through the Tur Abdin, who had fled from my weapons, came down and grasped my feet. That's the gesture of submission and of acceptance of political authority. I settled them in cities and houses suitable for them. We know that phrase. Ashurdan II had used the exact same phrasing. I imposed upon them more burden and payment than ever before. That sounds unattractive to us who do not like to pay taxes, right? I mean, but it's the reality. I mean, that's the big difference between a farmer within the Assyrian kingdom and being a pastoralist, that when you are a farmer, you pay a lot of taxes, which you don't if you are a pastoralist doing your own thing. So he's very upfront about that. Is that a threat? Is that a promise? Well, I don't know. To us, it sounds very unattractive. But in a way, we have to be aware of the fact that paying taxes in the world of ancient Mesopotamia is always seen as a transactional thing. You pay, but you get something back. And it's very clear what you get back. You get back protection. It's like a mafia racket, okay? So it sounds really negative to us, but we have to appreciate that it says implicitly it means, and thereby you are under my protection. That's actually a good thing. Okay. And what are the tax burden? What's the tax burden? Horses, mules, oxen, sheep, wine, and labor duty. That gives us a good idea of what you can grow in that region. The labor duty is very, very important. That is a key part of paying taxes. And I took their sons as hostages. Now, that doesn't sound benign, right? But that's something that is very, very important at that time, not just in order to make sure that people do what they are meant to do, that they keep to the bargain, but also because these people, these hostages, would have been taken back to Kaihu and would have been raised at court. Yeah. Okay. So again, sounds nasty, but you know, if you are sort of socially upward oriented, you may actually see this as a positive. Yeah. But to us, being taken a hostage is an unpleasant thing. And the sheer fact that this is coercion is clear. Yeah. Okay. So, but we can still be sort of positive about this. Yeah. Again, while I was in the city of Tushan, I also received the payment of various other people who are all identified by name and by their region or by their society context. So these are people from the general region, and they also pay their way in. And what do they give? The same stuff plus chariots and a lot of precious metals, namely silver, gold, and bronze vessels. Bronze vessels sounds a bit weird. We have to appreciate that at that time in the 9th century, Assyria operates on a bronze economy, not yet silver. Later on, it's silver, and you have small bits of silver that you can pay lots of stuff with. At that time, they use bronze, like Sweden in the early modern time. And if you've ever seen a Swedish currency, this is basically as big, as big as a table. You know, bronze is just big. So the currency, so to say, was these bronze vessels. Not just that you understand it. We are not yet in the late 8th century where this changes. So they have to give more stuff, more diverse stuff, and things that were never expected from within the provinces. Yeah. So that's basically the difference here. Whoops. And again, my beautiful thing has been destroyed. So the top thing, that's the province, the situation with the provinces, and the bottom thing, that's the client states. That's unfortunately gone here. Yeah. So what I want to stress here is that the Assyrian Empire, because that's what we can call it now, is quite different from what we had before, because from the 9th century onwards, it operates with these two categories that can be in the same territory, because we always make maps, of course, and these provinces actually exist, but there are these internal dual societies. Yeah, there is this agricultural system, and that is administered from the provincial center, and the produce is being collected in the provincial center, and the people that contribute to this are largely farmers, and there is this dual society. And some of these people may also have been farming, but most of them did not. They had all other lifestyles that we describe either as pastoralist or nomadic, depending on the geographical region. Yeah, and these people are tied into the Assyrian Empire by oath and by agreements between the king of Assyria and their political rulers. And that's why these people are mentioned by name, because these people all made an agreement with the king himself, yeah, and were bound, and they spoke for this community. Okay, so reintegration into Assyria at that time is negotiated, and there are two outcomes from the viewpoint of the Assyrian king. Yeah, two outcomes that you accept. That's non-negotiable. We'll see why in a moment. But there are two outcomes. One is you submit to a provincial government, which then also provides for you. That's this bit here. I settled them in cities and houses suitable for them. Yeah, that refers to the fact that people really had to be, if you will, converted into farmers. So Assyrian expansion doesn't have a religious element to it in the form of, we want you to believe in Assur. They're not. But what they certainly wanted was to promote a lifestyle. And the lifestyle was that of a sedentary farmer and taxpayer. That was what worked best for Assyria. But in the 9th century, it was accepted by the crown that this was not a deal that everyone would accept, could accept even. Yeah. So they had a second option. And the second option is that you enter into a client relationship, which was more distant. And you could basically live however you liked, as long as you still paid your taxes. And these taxes are also commodified. So you have to also deliver precious metals, which you don't have to do when you are a farmer, because how could you even access them? And you also have to really, really, really support the Assyrian army. Yeah, so the client states were part of the Assyrian armed forces. That's very important. Yeah, so when we talk about the Assyrian Empire from the 9th century onwards, we always talk about both the provinces and the client states. And yes, a lot of the client states are in the periphery of the provinces, but others are right in the middle of Assyria. And that situation is sustained until the end of Assyria. Even in the 7th century, you have people of this dual world, yeah, that are directly beholden to the king of Assyria in regions like the Sharizor. Okay, so far so good. Sounds still all quite okay. So you've had, okay, you have to become Assyrian, but you have a choice depending on whether you want to live in a house, but do farming or not. You have a choice, yeah. And if it stopped there, you're like, okay, it sounds pretty coercive, yeah, but it probably was good for the region overall, probably, life standards possibly went up, what's wrong with farming, okay. Well, unfortunately, it goes on, and we can't even, stop with that. We have to go on. And now it comes the really gruesome bit. Yeah. Now he says, okay, now I'm going back. And now I come across people that have already accepted my deal, but now they rebel. And he doesn't leave this out, because, as I said, it's part and parcel of Assyrian royal ideology that you have opponents and that you deal with them. Yeah. So only in such an ideological environment would you mention this in an inscription that you want to reflect well on you. Yeah. So that's that. So okay. So he's basically dealt with the people of Nirbu when crossing the Tur Abdin. They came to Tushkan. They made agreements. All was settled from the Assyrian viewpoint, but not to them, and they rebelled. Okay, so on my return march from the Nairi lands, the land Nirbu within Mount Kashiaru. Mount Kashiaru is the Tur Abdin mountain range, yeah, the one with all the Orthodox monasteries. They abandoned their 9 cities, or let's say towns, and trusted Ishpilipria, their fortified city, a rugged mountain. I then besieged and conquered the mountain peaks. Within the mighty mountain, I massacred them. I dyed the mountain red like red wool with their blood. The ravines and torrents of the mountain swallowed the rest of them. I carried off captives and possessions from them. I cut off the heads of their fighters and built with them a tower before their city. I burned their adolescent boys and girls. And that's really as bad as it gets. Yeah, this is the alternative. This is what happens when you do not accept this deal. And he wants people to know this. And we are dealing with a society where there is no superabundance of human life. We are dealing with an agricultural society where every person counts. I showed you this legal text from the reign of Tiglath-Pileser I, where the debtor might flee into the mountains and might not show up for the harvest. The sole point of the document was to make sure that at harvest time, there would be enough people there to bring in the harvest. Yeah, so we are dealing with societies always here, and that's a big difference between our times and the past. We're dealing with a society where you never ever waste a human life if it is possible within your political project. Yeah. So within the political project of reclaiming Assyria for the Assyrians, opposition to taking the deal was seen as such a negative that the only way to deal with this, once the offer had been made and accepted, was complete and utter destruction. Yeah, and that is this specific historical context. Yeah, that's not something you can generalize for the 8th century, for the 7th century, what have you. This is specific to that time of the reconquest of the Assyrian lands. Yeah, rejection of this offer of free integration, which generously came with 2 very different options. Yeah, generously is obviously sarcastically meant. Yeah, rejection of this offer is seen as such a crime against the balance of power, against what Assyria stands for, that it had to be countered in the most extreme forms of punishment. Yeah, and that is described here. And it really is then designed to destroy the community. Yeah, and knowledge of this is very widely disseminated. Yeah, this is not a secret, and that's why you cannot sort of then in a casual way liken Assyrian violence to Nazi violence. It's not hidden. Yeah, it is at the front and center of this expansion strategy, and at that time of the consolidation strategy. Knowledge of this is very, very widely disseminated. I've already pointed out these stele. The sheer fact that we are talking about this text shows you that it is successful. And when we then conclude with lessons from the Pathfinder Empire, I'd say at that time, in the late 10th century and the early 9th century, the political agenda was everyone in this area that we claim as ours has the right to be considered Assyrian. And that is really radical, because there was a time when a person of Assyria, an Assyrian was only a person from Ashur, nothing else. So there's a very, very inclusive definition what it means to be Assyrian. Yeah, anyone who was willing to be settled in this farmer's lifestyle was an Assyrian. That's fine. Yeah, it's a lifestyle more than anything. It has nothing really to do with ancestry, because the idea was anyone who lives in this area at some point had Assyrian ancestors. And that may well have been true. Who knows? It doesn't matter. At that time, that's what they stood for. So everyone has the right to be Assyrian, unless they reject it. If they reject it, then they are the other. And if they are the other, then they can only be the enemy. And that has typically, at that time, when Assyrian power is already really strong, solidified. I haven't shown you a map of the wider Middle East. Assyria dwarfs all the other states at the time, yeah, has lethal consequences and leads to instances of mass violence. But just to end with this, these were so heavily promulgated, were really used as deterrents, I would say, and in that sense have to always be seen as extreme reactions to what was seen as an extreme provocation, the rejection of a very, very generous offer. That's, of course, from the viewpoint of the Assyrian crown. Thank you very much.